Hey friend, in this video, I'm gonna teach you how to paint anything, literally anything with watercolor. So if you're staring at a blank sheet of paper and wondering where to even start, or maybe you're uncomfortable with certain subjects, with these steps, you can paint everything from a landscape to a portrait to loose style flowers, realistic style flowers, animals, doesn't matter. So if you're ready, let's dive in. So the first step to paint anything with watercolor is basic shapes. You wanna first analyze basic shapes of whatever it is you're painting. Again, this can be applied to animals, flowers, anything. So let's take a toucan, for example. I expand on this a whole lot more in my book, Everyday Watercolor. But if I were to paint a toucan, let's say, or any type of bird, I would start with a circle, so an actual circle, and an oval for the body or the torso of the bird. Depending on how long the bird is or how short, the oval will be a different size. But for a toucan, we've got a nice circle shape for the head and a longer oval because they have a longer body and tail. And that's gonna be my foundation for that bird. If I'm gonna paint an elephant, I'm also gonna start with a circle, a larger circle than what I would do for my toucan, depending on the size that I'm painting it. And then an oval on its side for the body of the elephant and a C curve for the trunk right on the left edge of the circle. And we've got a little bit of a stagger between the circle and the oval. And then we've got those four legs and a C curve for the tail. So I'm starting super basic. If you were to look at that sketch, you'd be like, what is that? I don't know what that is, but it tells me a lot because we're looking at the subject first in basic shapes. Or if I were to do a realistic flower, like maybe clematis flower, the clematis flower is a star-shaped flower. So every single petal is pointing back to the center, and it's got some like star-shaped petals. So you can start with lines, literally just pointing to the center, put a circle in the center and some straight lines poking out of that, kind of like sun rays. And then you've got your S curves on either side of those straight lines for the petal shapes. And those are going back to the center of the flower. So you got your star shape for that flower, or if it's a loose style flower like a parrot tulip or a peony or something like that, you could look at it as its basic shape as a cone or a bowl. So all of your petals are kind of pointing back and hugging the base of that bowl. Or if you were like to peel an orange, but keep the peels connected to the base of the orange, you're just peeling it back. That's how the flower petals are shaped. They're kind of wrapped around that orange in the middle, even though there's nothing there, and kind of falling out from the top and connected at the base like this. So everything can be pointing back to its basic shapes. Always start with whatever your subject's basic shapes are. If you're struggling with this, check out my two books, Everyday Watercolor and Everyday Watercolor Flowers. There's a bunch of subjects in there that will help you get really comfortable with this process, but everything can be broken down into basic shapes. That's step number one. And then step number two is to then draw or sketch the contour of the subject. So once you have your foundation done, the basic shapes, you're gonna then draw in the contour of the subject. So because you have your basic shapes down, that is your kind of like border or just like your overview of what the subject is. So you're gonna follow those basic shapes. So for the toucan, for example, you're gonna draw, the head is gonna be connected as a C curve or a U shape from the middle of the circle to the back of the oval on the right side. The beak is a C curve on the top with another straight line on the bottom, and the middle line of birds' beaks is also the baseline of the eyeball. So the middle of the beak is always lined up with the base of the eyeball. Whether you're painting or sketching a finch or a toucan, doesn't matter, that's just how it's lined up. And so you're gonna follow those basic shapes and sketch in the actual contour or outline of the bird, the elephant, the flower, whatever it is. So with your flowers, once you have your shape down, you're gonna sketch in some C curves and some texture on the top of the petals, maybe in some little detail lines if you're doing a more realistic approach, so you know where to add your shadows. You're gonna pencil in your stamen, which is gonna be on that circle or ball, and all of the little stamen are gonna be poking or coming out of that bulb of the flower. So this is the stage where you're adding in more detail and you're erasing the basic shapes. Those were just your guides to get your contour down. So you're gonna erase those basic shapes once you have your contour down. So everything from the outline to more detailed sketching, depending on if you're painting realistically or more loose. And once that contour is ready to go, you're gonna move on to step number three, which is painting the base layer. So with watercolor, we're working with a transparent medium. Obviously, we can get thicker and more opaque with our ratios and our consistencies, but that's usually saved for our final step when we're adding in details. So the first layer is really just to get down a wash or a light base color of the different sections of the animal, the flower, the landscape, whatever it is you're painting. So if I'm painting a toucan or an elephant, let's say, elephant, pretty straightforward. We have a really light gray wash. Like it's just a couple shades darker than the actual paper color. And we can add in some like tiny little blends and wet technique as we have this light layer down to start introducing midtones. So maybe under the belly of the elephant where the light doesn't really shine, or if you want to add shadow behind the ear to separate that crease from the ear and the body or the torso of the elephant. So this is where you start to introduce some midtones using wet technique. And then the second layer or the next step would be to add your midtones. So once you've got your base layer done and you have some shadows incorporated or some midtones incorporated, you're gonna start to get a little bit darker and really start to separate those sections of the elephant or the toucan, or in the case of a flower, if you're painting a ranunculus, there's tons and tons and tons of petals or layers in this type of flower. So then you're gonna start to go along each edge of each individual flower and get slightly darker and darker and darker each time to pull out each individual petal. And then finally, your last step for painting anything with watercolor is going to be to add your darkest details. So that's gonna be the texture on your flowers, the stamen, maybe some white spots if you have an opaque white like a white gouache and you wanna add some highlights in eyes, like the eye of your toucan, you can add a little white opaque dot in the eyeball to make that pop, or you can add shadow underneath the elephant's feet on the grass as your last little poppy detail, or little details on his toes. The texture on birds' feathers, like the toucan's feathers on his back, you can add dark black, blackish color for the texture of the feathers on the toucan. And then obviously with your flowers, you can add all your shadows and darkest tones in your last layer. So obviously that was a 7-8 minute video. There's a whole lot more information in my books. Make sure to check them out. But it's true, if you follow these 5 steps, basic shapes to contour, to first layer your lights, highlights, and then your midtones for your 4th step. And then final step is your darkest tones and your shadows. You can paint anything from a loose style flower to a realistic style flower, from a toucan and a finch to an elephant or a landscape or a portrait. There are so many resources out there. I have a ton in my book, but if you need more extra help, make sure you check out one of my best videos on this channel. It's super informative, is the Complete Beginner's Guide to Watercolor. So make sure you check out that one. It's like a 3-hour free watercolor class. It's awesome. And then also, if you want to take this even further, I do have a Patreon. So for as little as $2 a month, up to $20 a month tiers, we have everything in between as well. You can get exclusive Patreon only tutorials, live art classes with me where you can ask me questions as I'm painting and I will respond back to you. So ask questions live. Lots of great resources shared in my Patreon channel that I don't share anywhere else. So make sure you check that out. We'll link it here. Make sure you comment below if this was helpful for you. What was your favorite or maybe most eye-opening part of this video? And if there's an extra step that maybe you use in your approach that you'd like to share, hit me up in the comments below. I'd love to check it out. And I'm sure it'd be helpful for all the other people who are commenting and reading the comments. So thank you as always for watching these videos, and I will see you in the next one.